We're gonna make this, we're gonna cook.
These people, they got so much to do.
I know, you gotta get out of here, gotta move.
They're fine.
Well, if we stay in one place too long, it's a little scary.
Dinner
I'll tell
doesn't
you.
start till 4:30.
My longtime partner in this endeavor, who I've only been working with for about a third of his career in history, is Paul Dorpat. And Paul started in 1982, and I joined him for a book that we did together called Washington Then and Now in 2007. So I started taking all the pictures for the column that we do together about 12, 13 years ago. So, but I've watched
the now photos.
all the now photos. Well, I don't take the then.
He's
I don't take the then, Clay. I think they know that I don't take...
They're already chiding us for not being old enough to shoot the thens, so.
Candace, or Colleen, why don't you call a couple of people that left?
Or do you know who they were?
Yeah, Sam and Sandy and.
Okay, John.
What?
Everybody's here.
Colleen, is there, you want to turn on this screen here? I know I'm asking a lot.
Well, we're not exactly, we're from a different era.
Oh, we're all from a different era.
We still go with a little hammer and chisel.
There we
and
go.
piece of granite.
Yay.
So what you're looking at now is, well, there's a little Word document up in the corner, which is my father's obituary. And let's see, I'll get rid of that. That's going to the Times tomorrow. So let me get this. Okay, we're almost there. Now I'm going to grab the show. Okay, so you're going to have to get out your binoculars, I fear. We're going to make this full-sized. Okay. Oh, look at that. Isn't that pretty?
Wow, that's beautiful.
So that's the front cover of our book. The front cover photo was taken last summer. It was the last photo we took for this book. And it was taken last summer at the end of June. So it's about 9 months old. And the reason we had to wait so long is because for about a year before this picture was taken, the Space Needle was clad, was being repaired. And so about 5 days after they pulled the scaffolding down, I ran out to Queen Anne and grabbed that shot. But it was like, I was so worried that we wouldn't, because I had to get it in, and I had about 3 days to get it to our publisher. So we just slipped this last image of the Space Needle in.
And I showed him the gatefold, Gene. That's,
nice.
That's on the gatefold,
It is, that's the big one.
the
on
big
gatefold.
4-footer.
The clouds in the sky are pretty much the same.
Well, so this book has been 37 years in the making. And Paul started his first column. Oh, here he is right now. Let's have him say hello. Paul?
Yeah.
You are now on speakerphone talking to the gentle people at Quail Park in Lynnwood. Say hello, Paul.
Hello there.
Hello.
Everybody says hello back.
You must go on the way.
Paul is in his basement. He's not feeling...
Are your feathers combed and fluffed?
He's making a pun about Quail Park.
The feathers.
Are your feathers pulled and plucked?
Oh, yeah.
Never seen a quail here.
They say they never see a quail here, probably because they ate the last quail and named the place after that quail.
Well, are you having a good time together?
Well, we've just started. We don't know yet.
Oh, okay. Well, I'm sure you'll have a wonderful time.
All right. Well, offer us your...
It's a wonderful host.
Well, I'll tell you, Paul is a Lutheran. So, are there any Lutherans here? Oh, we've got one of your co-religionists, Paul. Just one, though. Another Lutheran. You're a Viking?
She's a Viking.
I was a Lutheran. I'm no longer a Lutheran.
Listen, once you were born a Lutheran, you can't escape. I'm sorry.
Tell him to get well quickly.
Okay, then I'll accept it. Now, I had a question about the computer.
Oh, well, why don't I call you back after, because we've had our digital discussion here. Why don't I call you back when we finish the show?
Okay.
All right, bye-bye.
Goodbye, Quail.
So Paul has he turned 80 last October. He has a dicey tummy, and when he wakes up and feels like he just can't travel, sometimes he'll stay at home and he'll work in his basement and call me, as my wife does, with computer questions at any time of the day or night. So it's amazing. He knows that I'm here, but he's calling me to solve a computer problem that he's having. I don't know if any of you have ever had computer problems, but
You always answer the phone.
The problem is we don't have anybody to call.
What's your number?
well, I'm not giving you my number.
What's your number?
Yeah, we'll stay away. Well, let's get on with the show here. Typically, in our introduction, I would tell you that Paul's been doing this since January of 1982. And his very first, and the book follows the history of the column for the 37 years that he's done it. I've only been involved in the last 650 or so, but he's done 1,800 columns since 1982. So it's a huge backlog of material. What we did is we went through all of those columns, many of which I was unfamiliar with, and chose around 100 subjects to play with. And I went back out for the last 2 or 3 years and reshot those now images to match the thens that were in the column. So the very first column that we see is this column from 1919. It is the very first column that was in Paul's book, in the column. I mean, it was January 17th to 1982. So it was his first column, and we thought we've got to start the book with the very first column he ever did. So this is at the corner of 4th and Pike. You can look down here. We're looking at Westlake. You may recall this little section here. That was the Bartels for many years. And the event, the reason they festooned all the flags are up, is it's the return of the 61st Coastal Artillery in 1919, Seattle's own from the First World War. Yeah.
Do you know if the Hopper Kelly building was at that corner?
I don't.
See, I was hoping he could tell me.
I don't. We'll call Paul after the show.
That's where my dad worked.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
A lot of Westlake has been changed. This structure is right across the street from the Joshua Green building. And it's right across the street on this side from another sort of Art Deco building from the late 20s. But this is the classic building, which is in all these photos, that kind of is that pie-shaped building on the corner that has this little corner here. And you can see it. It's still there today. What they've done, however, is they took the original 4 stories and they added on another 12 or so. So let's take a look, and we won't see those whole 12, but I went back. My job as the Now photographer is to go back and find some event that matches in significance the old one. Sometimes I succeeded, sometimes not. What I went back on a day a couple of years ago in January for the largest parade in Seattle history. It was the Women's March on January 21st of 2017. And there were 400,000 people marching down the street. And I thought, well, that's not a bad, and you can see, here's that same pie-shaped angle to the building. Many of the structures on Westlake going down that way were removed to open up a big civic space to have this big park. So I went back and shot this photo from pretty close to the same location. And now we're just going to take a look. That's the original Paul photo that he took in 82 of that same location. And you can still see there's the edge of what became the Bartels building. And in 82, he already found a barista selling coffee on the corner. And if you look closely, you can see she's holding the photograph that he's repeated. So that was his very first column for the Times. And here's how it looks in the book. This is how it appears now. We have these big, nice full pages, which Clay showed you, and we tend to fill up, it's called a full bleed. We bleed the entire photo so there's no margins, because we just want to see everything we can. We have to get the text in there to tell you what's going on, and then we, generally, we choose which photo is prettier to do the full bleed. And if the nice one is as this one is, that marvelous, then it just takes dominance here. So we'll work our way through, and again, you're going to need your binoculars to see this, because I know this is a small screen, but this is the largest, deepest snow in Seattle history. I'm sure you all saw the snow only a month, 5-6 weeks ago, in February, when no one could move. The entire city was shut down, and the school where I teach at closed for 10 days. Seattle public schools are now going deep into the summer because they missed so much time. Well, this is the deepest snow in Seattle history. It is 1880. And we're looking up at what was then called Front Street, First and Cherry. We're looking straight up towards First Hill at First and Cherry. This is Henry Yesler's Hall. It served so many purposes. They had a classroom in there, they had a dance hall. Yesler used it for just about everything. But that's Henry Yesler's Hall. The snow started falling and fell for 8 days. And it started the day after a column appeared in the Post-Intelligencer, which had the State of the Territory address from Elijah P. Ferry, who was our territorial governor. And he wrote up this wonderful comment that the entire Northwest was the perfect place for people to come. He was a great promoter. He was trying to get people to come to the Pacific Northwest because the weather was so perfect. Because it never snowed. It was always lovely. And so on Sunday, it was like Sunday, January 4th, he wrote this little promo piece about how the weather was perfect in the Northwest. The next day it started to snow. It snowed for 8 days and 48 inches. So we're going to look at that today. Now here's an example where I maybe was not quite so successful. It's been tough getting deep snow at First and Cherry for the last 5 years. But I did run down there a year and a half ago when it snowed, and I did get, I got the flakes. And I want to call your attention, if you can see that far, there's a little pile of snow on that yellow, you see? I was proud of that pile of snow. And that's, every time it snowed, even this last snow, I ran down to First and Cherry, and it was one of the only intersections where it was really plowed and it was just gone. By the time you could get down there, there was no snow.
It's tough to get a snowplow on top of a fire hydrant.
It is, yeah. They couldn't snowplow the fire hydrant. That is true. We're going to run down to the waterfront for the next couple shots. This is a marvelous waterfront picture by a photographer who shot for the Northern Pacific. And he came over the mountains shooting. He was a railroad photographer. He was Norwegian. And he spent several years in Seattle. His name was Anders Vilse. And when he was in Seattle, he became one of our great documentarians of the city. This is a marvelous shot of the waterfront in maybe '98, looking south on the waterfront. His back is to Pike Street. So he's standing right down below. Pike is right up here above him, and he's looking south from Pike Street. Now, when I went back, I took some of my kids to see this same location. And knowing that I was going to shoot it, I got to about the same spot, and it's right about here.
Oh my gosh.
There's my kids, one of them jumping for joy, because he's not in school, he's down on the waterfront. And if you'll see, now I have shots taken last week that shows the viaduct already is gone. It's amazing. Now the most amazing thing about it is, whatever you feel about the viaduct, Clay is a West Seattleite, he loved the viaduct because it was such an easy way to get into town. Whatever you feel about the viaduct, the one thing I can tell you is, when you're walking around on the waterfront now, you can talk to each other because there's no traffic noise. It's kind of a miraculous, it's something it's like you've been abused for so long and they take the noise away. You feel absolutely marvelous because suddenly it's quiet. Now, it's not quiet when they're tearing down, but you go there after 5 in the afternoon when all the workers have gone, and it's like you can hear the gulls, and you can hear the waves lapping in front of you. It's the aural experience is pretty unique. So that's the one thing that I didn't expect would be so powerful to me is just the sound of silence on the waterfront. Here's another Anders Vilse photograph, and I'm going to read something in this photo which you can't quite see from where you are. I can barely see it from 10 feet back. This is Anders Vilse looking from the opposite direction. That's Coleman Dock right there. So the ferry's right here. He's looking north, and north is the direction at this point where everyone wanted to go. Because in 1898-99, we had a gold rush. And the Yukon, Alaskan, this enormous number of people were coming through Seattle, heading up there to find their fortune in gold. And there's a wonderful little sign here that says, portable aluminum houses, are frost and fireproof, just the thing for Alaska, weight 150 pounds. So if you've seen Charlie Chaplin's Gold Rush movie, where all these guys are slowly marching up the hill, and this long line of ants crawling up the hill, I saw it recently, and I thought 150 pounds being hauled up one of those hills, because I think it was like, what was it, Chimacum Pass? Chilkoot Pass. And it was.
But it was really filmed in.
I know exactly. It was filmed near where the Donner Party was. It was filmed in Truckee, California. Well, let's go forward. So let's look at this today. This is gold rush time. In a 6-month period, in the winter of 98-99, more than 100 ships left Seattle to get up to the Yukon. So big transition here.
Which was in Canada.
Yes. So here we are. This is the modern location. Now again, this whole section in front of the docks is gone. So here's an example of it's changed so quickly that our second edition is going to be just reshooting all the photos that have the viaduct in them. Anders Vilse became so beloved in Norway. He moved back to Norway because his wife was unhappy with him in being in Seattle. He moved back to Norway and started, the next 30 years, started shooting astonishing landscape and everything from portrait photography to landscape to street photography. He was a master. And our loss was Norway's gain. So for the next 30 years, he became kind of the Ansel Adams of Norway. They put out a whole series of stamps with his images on them, and this is one of them, and I just thought, isn't that glorious? And my dad was Norwegian, so I have to include a little shot of Vilse. Well, this is looking down, not from the top floor of Smith Tower, but from the 35th floor. And it's a photographer named Frank Noel. And true to form, as all photographers do, and I do it myself, we all climb up to the highest point in the city we can find to take that photo, to get a sense of the panorama of kind of the marvel of what we're looking at. Because you look at it from on high and you can see everything. Well, in this case, here he is on 2nd Avenue. And for the very first time on 2nd Avenue, 35 floors up, the building is still, it's 1913. Smith Tower is still a year from being finished. And he's looking down from Smith Tower's 35th floor, and for the first time you can see Lake Union. You can see Queen Anne. There's Queen Anne High School. There's Wallingford in the distance. There's St. James Cathedral, which in 1913 still had its dome. The second biggest snow, 1916, and the St. James Cathedral dome collapsed, narrowly missing several dozen Catholic schoolgirls who had just had services that morning, February 2nd, 1916, which was our second deepest snow. So here we are 3 years before that, looking down from Smith Tower, 35th floor, and I call your attention to that little building, which is the Rainier Club downtown. And behind it, the Methodists, they had their dome. And if we look at it today, I want you to keep your eyes kind of just hold on to that little section of the picture, and everything around you, we'll see how it falls into place. I went to the top of Smith Tower and retook this one. So we no more Lake Union, no more Queen Anne. You might see a tiny little sliver up there. There's the Rainier Club, and behind it, you can just make out the edge of the building of the Methodist Church with the dome in it. Up there, we can still see St. James without its dome. Well, now we're going to jump up to what we commonly refer to as the Aurora Bridge. And it is, someone said it? What is the name?
Washington Bridge.
George Washington Memorial Bridge. And it's named after George Washington. And it was opened on George Washington's 200th birthday in 1932. Well, the year before, they had to pull all the tall-masted ships out of Lake Union, or they would just have to cut their masts down and to get them out from under the bridge. Because there was one way out if you had a tall mast, and it was this one, and that bridge wasn't going to open. So this is the Monongahela, which is one of the great ships it was built in Glasgow in 1882. It carved the ocean deep for 40 plus years, and then ended up for the last few years of its life in Lake Union, until they realized, well, the bridge, we got to pull this out before the bridge goes, or we're just, taking a chainsaw to the mast. So they towed the Monongahela out, and sadly, it was sold within a year or so to a Vancouver logging company just to be used as a barge. So they cut down those masts anyway. But still, I love this shot of one element of human history representing the four-masted sailing ship being taken away in 1931, and a year later it was disappeared completely as the barge. Yeah.
Is this part of some of the photographs that are underneath the saddle walkway from the
No, there were
to Union Square?
That's a good question. There are all sorts of interesting wrecks down there. The Monongahela ended up in Canada.
Okay.
So it was scuttled somewhere off the shores of Vancouver Island.
Because one of the most impressive pictures I've seen was when they broke the coffer dam.
Right.
And the water from Lake Washington flowed in to create in Lake Union, and I mean to really raise.
It really, yeah. No, the breaking of the coffer dam is actually, I think we have a photograph of the coffer dam, the results of the coffer dam being broken, and you can see all the houseboats along Lake Union have been grounded because the dam broke and they weren't floating anymore. So, well. Today, we look at, now I tried again to get there, I wanted to get something in there, but I went back maybe 4 times, and I never found the right size craft. That's my Monongahela right there. You can just see that. It made it through with its single mast. It did have to raise up the Fremont Bridge to let it go through though. So, but, this is one of those just beautiful city shots that you look at, and Paul, if he were here, would say, well, this is the one you want to send to your family in Peoria. Maybe they'll come, spend some time in Seattle if they see the image. Because this is what it looks like in spring and summer. We're looking at the window now.
Those clouds are beautiful.
Well, there's another story that attaches to the opening of the Aurora Bridge, and it's this is called the Taft Key. It was used in 1909 to inaugurate, by President Taft, the first Seattle World's Fair, called the Alaska Yukon Pacific Exposition, which many of you know about. And that first fair, Taft was given this marvelous key. It's mounted. It's 22 carats, 22 nuggets of pure gold, mounted on a slab of Alaskan marble, given to Taft. And so when he was in D.C., he pressed the button to start the fair, and all this gold, incidentally, was mined by George. It's Carhart, who was the guy who discovered gold in the Yukon. So this was his personal celebration to commemorate not only his discovery, but taken from his mines he grabbed those nuggets, mounted them on this slab, and sent them to the president. It's still being used today, yeah.
What years was the Alaska Yukon Pacific?
1909.
1909. It was a 6-month, started June 1st, 1909, went to October 15th. So that was our first big World's Fair in which we were positioning ourselves, Seattle, as we're the gateway to the Pacific, to Hawaii, to Alaska. You come here to get any of these places.
My mother was, I believe, 9 or 13. She was 12 or 13 years old, and she was requested to sing at the Alaska Yukon Exposition.
Wow.
My mom.
That's a great story. Well, we have a wonderful shot in here of the AYP, as it's called, with looking down the pay streak. So take a look after we finish here. There it is. This is what this is on the University of Washington campus.
Yeah, it was what really created the U.
It really did create the U, and only a couple buildings remain from the actual fair, but it did create many of the structures that, like Frosh Pond, the big Drumheller fountain. That's entirely a product of the exposition. So, well, this is the key that opened the exposition. It was also used significantly throughout the country, mostly in Seattle, because it was a miner who moved to Seattle and lived here and made his fortune in the Yukon. And it was used also to open up the Aurora Bridge, or the George Washington Memorial Bridge. And it was on George Washington's 200th birthday, February 22nd, 32, that the bridge was opened. So you have to imagine this now. All these people, the key had not yet been pressed. It's a Saturday afternoon. All these people are gathered to celebrate the opening of this marvelous bridge, which connected a huge swath of Seattle with another swath, got rid of traveling down in those city streets and going over the Fremont Bridge and all that stuff. It was this enormous 6-lane road that went right across that just tumbled across the sky. So all these people were waiting on either side of the bridge. You had thousands of them, so excited. The mayor, the governor, Roland Hartley, who was deeply opposed to this bridge or any interstate projects. He was from Everett. He was not in favor of anything that benefited Seattle or King County. He was an Everett guy. He didn't care about it. So he had been inveighing against it for years. He hated the whole idea of the project. But once it was up and he saw the enormous crowds and he got to the dais and he's standing there, he starts saying, "This is my idea. I'm the best. I took it only because of me." And he talked and talked and talked. And at 2:57, Herbert Hoover in D.C. has the Taft key in front of him. And he hits the button, not knowing that Roland Hartley is going on and on and on. And as soon as Hoover hits that button on schedule at 2:57, all of the fireboats start shooting their great mast plumes in the sky, and the flags unfurl, and the crowd stream cheering out into the bridge, interrupting Hartley, and he never finished his speech.
That's great.
And here we are today. Now, one of the things I have to do to be able to get to certain positions is I have a 21-foot telescopic pole. And so occasionally, you can see in the old photo that he's actually standing on the hillside. Well, the hillside today still exists, but it's completely covered with shrubs and trees.
This is looking northbound.
So I'm looking...
And the photographer is at the northeast corner of Queen Anne Hill.
So you went to Canlis for lunch then?
It's right across the street from Canlis.
There you go.
Right. So here I am. Canlis was closed at this point, but I couldn't get up there without a chainsaw. Literally, I'd have to cut down trees to be able to see the view. So that's when I bring out my pole, and it goes 21 feet in the air. And with a 5-pound camera on top of it, it gets a little bit dicey sometimes. But a number of photos here were I was aided by having that pole. I'm tempted to get a drone and use that someday, but many areas in Seattle, you just can't do it. It's forbidden. on Aurora, they don't like you using
And
drones.
parks, city
And
parks.
Yeah, parks. So here is a lovely shot of Herbert Hoover pressing the Taft key and interrupting Roland Hartnell. He's in the White House. I love this picture because I know exactly when it happened. It's February 22nd, 1932, and there he is. And I don't know where he is. He's got a look at this.
Yes, it's got a.
It didn't seem too formal. I think he's just watching the clock, and it hits 2:57, and boop, and he hits it.
Yeah.
Well, it would have been DC, so it would have been 5:57, right? The last time the Taft key was used was by John F. Kennedy, and he's about to hit the button to open the Seattle World's Fair of '62.
Wow.
So here he is, just about, he's on the phone, you know, Hoover didn't even bother to get on the phone, he just hit the key at the right time. I think, you know, Kennedy was saying, okay, you guys ready? All right, here we go, you know, so at least he was in communication. So he opened the World's Fair, and the Taft key, covered in gold on that Alaskan marble, is now in the Smithsonian. Well, let's look at the, so here we are, and if you squint, you might be able to make some of this out. This is young Paula Dahl, and she was 6 years old, and she was, in the last few weeks of the fair, of the '62 World's Fair, she was the 9 millionth visitor to the fair. And they gave her this sign, they gave her a big stuffed dog, and I guess it was lavender, and here are her proud parents watching over here, and if you look, you can see this more clearly in the book, but there's her very unhappy sister over her shoulder. Not, you know, 9 millionth and one, ow! She missed it by that much. Well, we went back, and this is several years ago, featured in the column, I think in 2013. But I love this photo, we just popped it in the book, because some personal stories I think are wonderful. She's an elementary school teacher in Issaquah. And here she is with her class, and on the wall of her classroom, she still has the 9 millionth sign. So, I don't know how her sister feels about that. Well, here we are. This is the most spectacular photo of the Seattle fire while it's raging. Most of the photographers, this is 1889, it's June 4th, most of the photographers have their studios down here.
Oh.
They're all the great photographers down on First and Cherry, the Peterson Bros. All of them have their studios down Pioneer Square and northbound. And so here we are at Spring and Front Street, Spring and First Avenue, looking down at this fire burning. This is the Fry Opera House, and there's a tiny little figure standing high up on the Fry looking over this conflagration coming up from the docks. And a huge number of people. Now, 30 blocks were burned to nothing. I mean, they were just ashes, and we'll see a picture of that in a second. But 30 blocks disappeared. No one died except a bunch of rats. So all these people disappeared. Very few photographs of the fire burning. Hundreds of the fire, you know, in the days afterwards, the ashes. But almost none of the fire, because you can imagine these photographers grabbing their cameras and their negatives and their slides and running to save as much of their equipment as they could. So a handful came up and took a few shots. There's fewer than a dozen pictures of the Seattle fire, and this is the best of them. So this is you know, my favorite of all those Seattle fire shots. And here it is today, again with a 21-foot pole, because it was taken originally from a building that was a couple stories high, looking at Spring Street and looking straight down First Avenue. You can see what they decided within literally days after the fire burned. The city, the mayor, all the council members, all the powers that be in the city, all the business people said, we're going to rebuild. And this is, I was reading a newspaper just yesterday, which had, I think, 4 days after the fire, front page of the Post-Intelligencer. It was saying, we're going to rebuild in stone and brick. We're never going to build wood again. This is an opportunity. We'll get rid of the wood, and will rebuild in brick and stone and mortar. And they did. And that's, many of these buildings, as you look down here, they were going up in 1 or 2 years after the fire. They just, they were building like crazy, like China is today. They had industry and they were pushing hard. They knew what they wanted, and they wanted a big city called Seattle. The Seattle Spirit, they called it in those days.
Is that looking north or south?
This is looking south. So this is right down towards Pioneer Square. And you can see in the fire shot, the fire started down on the docks south of, and it went all the way up to just before, it burned all the way up towards where University Street is now. So just south of University is where the fire stopped.
So wasn't 89 also the year that Washington became
Statehood.
state?
It was. So about fire June 4th, statehood, we voted on October 1st, and in November we became the first state. So it was a significant time. 89 was a big year for Washington State. You had a question?
That answered my first one. The large pole sitting there,
This is just an enormous, tall, as you can see.
utility, I can see it in the back.
Yeah, I think that's a telegraph pole.
Yeah, you can see now I can see the one for the,
Right.
those were huge, enormous.
They were
things to
huge,
set.
enormous poles, and they all burned
And I
down.
can even see where they have the steps on the side
Yep,
now.
you could climb right up.
Yeah, well, that was in 89.
Well, there's, this picture was titled in the paper, it was titled, "The Hideous Remains." This is, when we go to the next photo, most likely you'll recognize exactly where this is, because we're looking at the front part of a building here, which no longer exists, but some of you may recall it. So that's one clue. But right now you've got the firemen, this is 2 days later, this is June 6th, 1889. They're already down, you can see there's a little bit of smoke still curling up from the ashes here. The piles are steaming. And we'll go forward and we will see just where we are. We're pretty close to this spot. Well, this is the Pioneer Building, built right, Henry Yesler's first house was right there on the footprint there. And they put the Pioneer Building up, and this structure right here, some of you may know. Does it look familiar at all? You may recall it as the Sinking Ship Garage in Pioneer Square. Well, the Sinking Ship Garage, let's go forward a little bit. The Sinking Ship Garage was built right here on the footprint of the Occidental Hotel, which burned down, which was replaced by the Seattle Hotel shortly after the fire, within a year or so after the fire. They quickly built up this gorgeous, this is 1908. It's the return of, it's the Great White Fleet. It's a huge celebration. And look at the festooning, look at this, everything coming off, all the architecture. This was a time of celebration. Well, this, 1908, it's still a few years, 6 years before we have Smith Tower. But we look at it today and watch as it diminishes and becomes the Sinking Ship Garage. There it is. And there's Smith Tower, that's fine, and there's the Pioneer Building. But watch again, this gorgeous hotel on exactly the same footprint is now the Sinking Ship Garage. Now, you all remember Victor Steinbrook, the name Victor Steinbrook? Well, Victor was one of the designers of the Space Needle. And when that Sinking Ship Garage was put into place at the Seattle Hotel, Victor was so incensed that he started a preservationist movement. And you're going to see the results of the movement that Victor started as out of the anger of losing the Seattle Hotel to the Sinking Ship Garage. There's only one thing I want to mention about the Sinking Ship Garage, which is, if you look at it closely, there's one sensitive aspect that the architects of the Sinking Ship Garage indulged in. If you look, you can see these sort of basket handle windows on the building of Merchant's Cafe. And a very old building, built shortly after the fire. Well, they very sensitively and intentionally put up these basket handled railings at the top. That's sensitivity.
Doesn't that make it a beautiful parking garage?
Anyway, it's a structure that everybody loves to hate, with good reason.
Well, the streets on each side of it are going uphill.
They do, they go uphill and they
So it
split.
looks like it's sinking.
It does look like it's sinking.
If people aren't familiar with downtown Seattle, they
Right.
might not know that.
It does to some extent. They also did something kind of odd, which is they decided if you go into it, it does more than just go uphill. It goes uphill the other direction too. They made it so that you drive up to the prow of the sinking ship garage. It's really a strange place, and you always feel like you're about to be attacked in the sinking ship garage. You have that sinking feeling.
Oh.
So here's what Victor saved. In the 60s, the market was considered a derelict place. And there were a number of politicians, and I won't name them, Wes Ullman, who wanted to get rid of the market and replace it with condos, parking garages, and Victor Steinbrook said, never. We've lost the Seattle Hotel, making the Pioneer Square much less a place of beauty, and we can't lose the market. This is from 1907, first year of the market. And I, again, with my 21-foot pole, I got close to this same shot, but I wanted to get a little bit of the sweep of it today. And what I love is, even in those days, everyone is walking right down the center of the market. There's no sense of traffic, be damned. We go straight and we see everyone feels free to walk down the center streets of the market. And if you're driving, tough luck. You just have to take your time. But it's a treasure that Victor led the city in saving. Thousands of people rallied to the cause. And they all said, save our market. And it became, and that's why at the far end of it, we have Victor Steinbrook Park in honor of his saving the market. So one person can do a lot. Any guesses where this is?
I think.
Where could this little country road be?
I think I've seen that picture and I'm trying to remember. It's on a hill coming up. Is it up above where the freeway is now?
It's a very good guess. It's not even up above where the freeway is now.
Parallel is.
It is where the freeway is now. In the 50s, a Boeing employee named Werner Langenhager from Austria wandered around the city with his camera, and he made a particular effort to shoot those places that he knew were going to disappear. This was the alley, just a couple blocks from his house. Melrose Place, just up on Capitol Hill, or between Capitol Hill, right now where this stands. So we're looking south towards the city, and the little country lane from the 50s, within about 6 years, it was a trench and then turned into what we know today as I-5. To me, this is one of those photos which I think almost launched, again, a preservationist movement. This is 3rd and Union. It's the federal building, the post office, on the corner of 3rd and Union. And in 1958, it was torn down, and specifically, the reason given, it lasted 50 years. And these steps, people are standing on these steps, chatting on these steps, waiting on these steps, because whenever you wanted to meet someone in the northern business district of Seattle, just south of Belltown, you would say, meet me at the steps, or meet me at the post office steps. It was like that middle ground where everyone knew to come and stand around and smoke their pipes and chat. It was a meeting place. And in 58, World's Fair was on the horizon. We had to modernize. One of the things that they said was, well, look at those steps, look at those columns. They've been stained with pigeon poop. They're Chuckanut sandstone. They're just so ugly. Let's take it down and replace it with something modern and beautiful. So here's what they did. So that's the post office now. And a PI architectural critic about 10 years ago wrote, when there was still a PI, wrote, it's like a filing cabinet tipped on its side. It's not a pleasant structure, and the thing that I regret most is that there's no place to meet. You can't say, oh, meet me at the post office and expect anyone will want to stand here. It's just a thoroughfare. It's a loss of this kind of public space where we gather. So that's that's where I find a sense of regret. What's this? You all know what this is.
Shantytown.
It is Shantytown, also called Hooverville. This is about 250 of 500 shacks down on the Port of Seattle land, taken from the B.F. Goodrich building, which no longer exists. Well, the Port of Seattle brought out a cherry picker and let me get up in it. And I managed to repeat this shot. You can see Smith Tower, pretty lonely on the skyline. Smith Tower was the tallest building west of Mississippi until the Space Needle. So Smith Tower stands alone for 50 years or so. And here we have, there's the change. This is about the same spot as from the B.F. Goodrich building, and there's Smith Tower against this, the obvious skyline that we have today. Okay, so now you've all heard of trigger warnings. Well, I'm going to give the trigger warning right now. So and you'll see in a second before I flip to the next slide, because this is the corner of Fremont and 43rd. And it's 1941, and it's the last northbound trolley that goes up to Finney Ridge. All of the trolleys downtown have been replaced by gasoline-powered buses at this point, and trackless trolleys.
You don't want those unsightly tracks. I
know, it's just so awful. And many of them were sent to other places around the world. Well, San Francisco held on to theirs, and they never suffered for it. But we decided we're getting rid of all of them. This was the last trolley to go up the hill from Fremont up to Finney Ridge, up into the far north. And this trolley, the guy who took the photo was the trolley driver, trolley man, streetcar guy.
Motorman.
Thank you, Clay. So here he is, and we're at the corner of Fremont and 43rd. There's the Fremont Baptist Church just peeking out. This is like early 40s. And within a year, all the trolleys are gone. All the electric streetcars are gone. Disappeared. They've been sent away to Australia and different places that actually still wanted electric trolleys. And then we got our gasoline-powered engines and rubber tires. Well, let's look at it today. Now, this is where you might want to close your eyes, because I went back a couple years ago during the Fremont Solstice Parade. It had to be, there's some images where when you're trying to replace them, I could have gone down where there was a streetcar, but when you can get nudes on the street, that's only in Seattle, and only one day a year. And if you haven't been down there, it is rather amusing to see hundreds of people covering their bodies with paint and riding bicycles through the city streets. So, in place of the trolley, we have two women walking abreast. This is a Chinese festival on King Street, and it's in 1921. Which is about 35 years or so after the Chinese were excluded from Seattle and put on a boat and sent away. And it took 20 years for the Chinese community to re-establish itself up even to the levels they had been in 1886. Well, so this is kind of like, it's 20 years after that. You've got a lion dancer, you've got what is now the Wing Luk Museum down here. All these buildings still remain. This is now going to be called the Hotel Louisa. It's been repaired beautifully. The Milwaukee Hotel is still there. I wanted to get a sense of that celebration, so I went to the Seattle Kung Fu Club and talked to and convinced the longtime, he's 81 years old now, and he's Sifu John Liang, who was one of Bruce Lee's teachers. And so Sifu John brought his entire school out onto the street to repeat this photo, and there they are. with their lion dancers. And see, John, you can see back here, and I just popped in a couple days ago to visit him, and he's like a miracle of force of nature. 81 years old, and he's still teaching Kung Fu,
Wow.
which is quite mind-boggling. So, well, this is a shot we call the repeat version of it. We call an ironic photo, because nothing is left of what's here. It's all been replaced. It's all gone, this bucolic scene. Why? I'll give you one hint. This is a river that disappeared. It was the river that flowed out of Lake Washington to saltwater. And it's gone. When Lake Washington was lowered for the locks, that river disappeared. That was gone. The river was, all along its banks, it had Duwamish fishing villages, it had thousands of years of life that had been carried out along its banks. Well, when they finally opened the locks in 1917, everything lowered to the level of about Lake Union. Lake Washington dropped 9 feet or so, and the Black River went away. There's little trickles of it in Tukwila that come up in parks in Renton and Tukwila, but you could never boat down it. This was I think this was a Times excursion where in one afternoon they were trying to get all the way down from Lake Washington to the Sound. I don't think they made it, but we figured out where this spot was. Paul did this about 25 years ago. He figured out this location. And it's pretty close to McDonald's. There's a Brown Bear car wash right over here. This is Carl. And this is Rainier Avenue. And that's, if you just take a right, you'll end up in Renton. But that's yeah.
Is that similar to what there was, every once in a while you can find a little spot going north from Green Lake, going up towards 85th or in that area, where Duke's is in that area.
Right.
There's there used to be a river or something that flowed down into that area.
There are a lot of rivers that we've covered over now, and Green Lake is another place that we lowered Green Lake, making the parks that are around it now. So that jogging trail around Green Lake, that biking trail, and that little flatland around Green Lake was considerably larger and higher, and what we created by lowering it was a lot of land around the outside. But yes, definitely there are rivers which are now buried and streams which are now buried. Many of them, one of the reasons Green Lake gets so filthy is that the outlets are not quite as prolific. It doesn't flow quite as well as it once did. So that's one of the troubles is. Well, speaking of which, this is Lake Union. This was on the cover of Paul's first Seattle Now and Then book, and these are the Brown children, taken by their father. He became a Seattle cop. This is taken around late 1890s, early 1900. And we're looking toward the southeast on Lake Union, from now where we're kind of about Aloha looking across. This is a little cove. This is a bay. And to give you a sense, if you know this area in any way, this, and I'm not mistaking this here, this street running alongside, way behind the kids, and the huge body of water between them, and that is Westlake. So you have a huge bay of water. Now, all of the area to Westlake is filled in, completely filled in. So this is an anomalous little bay in Lake Union, and here's what it looks like today. Blocks from this point to the lake, it's several blocks. So, and to Westlake. This is Liana and Tia Owen, the children of my next door neighbor, and I thought it was only appropriate. We took this for a Museum of History and Industry show we did in 2011 to repeat that early photo. And I thought it was only appropriate to have them come back last year and retake it. So there's Tia and Liana, and 8 years later, Tia can drive. which is terrifying. The Flying Bird. Well, this was a ship built in the mid-30s, and in Paul's original column, I love it when he says it was intended to some extent to lift us from our depression. It was so lovely and so popular. And look at the people. This is in 48. It's coming from Lake Union through the locks back out to the Sound. And so here they are, and all these folks, hundreds of people lined up along the top deck, and even in all the windows, if you look closely, you'll see all these people filling up the windows. The captain is up in the wheelhouse here. We'll talk about that in a moment, because the wheelhouse was a terrible place to steer from, if you might imagine. And now Clay is going to do, because how many of you have actually ridden on the Kalakala?
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7.
More than half.
That's true. And it was a unique experience, wasn't it?
Was it turned into a dance hall or something at one time?
It turned into a lot of things.
Yes.
But it did
fish
end up,
processing plant, it went up north, it went to Tacoma, and it finally died a very sad death. But I got to ride the Kalakala on the last month that it was on. It was just coincidental. I was in my high school stage band. We went over to Bremerton for a festival with Quincy Jones at Olympic College, and our school bus rode on the Kalakala. And what I remember most, beyond the spider webs and the cavernous aspect and the fact that you couldn't go to the upper floors because they were closed off in spider webs, was the noise. Because when the ferry started to run, the walls felt like they were going to fall over. It was and it was a memorable experience. But it was a beautiful ship. It was an absolutely beautiful ship. And notice how you all reacted when you first saw it. Your heart goes out for the Kalakala.
well, I also, even though I didn't ride on it, my mother, when she was about 16, was coming home from church camp. And she had knocked out a tooth and had a replacement tooth put in, and she was on the Kalakala and was horrified when she went into the bathroom to brush her teeth and found that her replacement tooth fell out into the Kalakala drain. And so she had to walk around like this, and it was so horrifying because the boys saw her, without her tooth. But that was the story. So that would have been about 1950-51 when my mom was lost her tooth.
And its last run is June 1967.
Not long ago. Ooh.
So I had to go back again and try to get another photo. And I found that one of the Bremerton Museum ships was being repaired and overhauled in Lake Union a couple years ago in the spring. And so I went down about 6:30 in the morning, and there's the tugboat pulling the USS Turner Joy through the locks and out to its Bremerton berth.
I was stationed on that ship.
You were stationed on the Turner Joy?
Yes.
Well, then you should tell the story about, because the Turner Joy was one of 2 destroyers involved in Gulf of Tonkin. It went to the aid of the USS Maddox. And when were you stationed on the ship?
I was there at that.
You were there?
Yes.
You were at the Gulf of Tonkin when the Turner Joy went there? Well, give him a hand, because I've never had anyone say that to me before.
That's scary.
Well, that's marvelous. Well,
Scary.
In fact, we're having a reunion this summer, and it's going to be held over Bremerton this year.
are you going to do it on the ship itself?
Yeah, we'll go to a ship, yes.
That's great. Well, the current director, and I've forgotten his name, who just assumed of the museum, he was the one I was talking to, and he said, "Oh yeah, the Turner Joy's coming through." But that's a marvelous story to tell. Well, I did find an AP image of the Turner Joy, so it's going back through and it's now out at Bremerton, and they did a beautiful job, and I actually stood in the docks and shot all the ship as it went past. So I have some lovely shots of this kind of a deserted ship. What was your position on the ship?
Electronic technician.
So where would your station have been?
I
Where
was
would-
in the radio room, which is on the old one deck, right behind the bridge.
Really? So back behind here?
Yeah.
Well,
There was
that's,
the bridge, and then there was radar room or IC, and then the radio room was the third room back.
wow.
What a-
Well, that's
I
deeply,
didn't see anything, but I sure listened to a lot of it.
I bet you did. Well, that's great. Well, I lucked out because I didn't know the history of the Turn of Joy until after I took the photo. And when it came out, I went, wow. I sort of just happened into that one. It was good luck that I managed to replace the Kalakala with another a ship of historical importance.
Right.
So I was very pleased. Well, here it is. The caption in the AP photo section said that this is off the coast of Vietnam. So you were probably on the ship when this picture was taken.
Her distinction was during the Vietnam War was we fired the first volley of shells into Vietnam, and she was the last ship to have finished bombardment at
Wow.
the end of Vietnam.
And wasn't she decommissioned in 81? Like in the early 80s?
No, I can't tell you. I
Yeah.
got off in 64, so
Wow.
just shortly after.
Shortly after, because it was August 2nd, wasn't it? It was the 5th?
Yeah.
Well, we won't go into the odd, and because there's some amazing stories about the Gulf of Tonkin, and I guess there were two events that occurred, and the first one was pretty well documented. The second one, there's some questions about.
They say it never happened, but it did. Let me tell you, it did.
Interesting. Well, an interesting story to hear from you, and maybe we'll chat later. So we're closing into the end of the show. This is, Clay took this shot. This is down by Salty's of West Seattle.
That's sick.
It is the wheelhouse of the Kalakala. It's one of the last portions of the Kalakala that remain. And behind it, there's the drivetrain, which I didn't put in the picture. It kind of runs maybe 25 feet like a dinosaur's spine down below the wheelhouse. But you can see when the captain was standing in the wheelhouse, one of the problems that was with these beautiful round windows that made it look like a spaceship, one of the problems was you had restricted view. So you didn't have, like, you go on the modern ferries and you have these enormous picture windows where you can see everything. Well, that's handy. Even with radar, it's nice to be able to see what you're aiming at. Well, the restricted view was bad enough in those days. You had to have a call and response team down on the dock saying, "Come in, bring it in!" And then they call up to the captain around it, because it was so hard to see out of these windows. So there were downsides of having a really cool Art Deco ship. One of them was the engine, as Clay demonstrated. The other one was the sight lines were not very good when you were the captain on the bridge. Well, we're coming into the end here. We're going to show you two signature moments here. This is the 2 days before the viaduct opened. And actually, we just repeated this in the paper about a month or so ago. And the photo that I took for the repeat was 2 days after the viaduct closed completely. And I managed to get the head of Ivar's to come out and stand in the place of these gals. So but you can see they're wearing this incredibly beautiful red, what would you call those? Trench coats? Ladies, what do we call those long, marvelous midi jackets? It's April.
Go ahead.
April 53.
Yeah.
So we're right, this is the height of fashion, and I have a feeling they were models walking down just for the photographer. But again, there's Smith Tower, which at this point in 53 is still the tallest building in Seattle. And here we are, and you might note my red car. I'm very proud of that red car. Now, back behind, there's Smith Tower. This is a building which is just about to be completed, and it was at the time called the Mark. And the Mark building is now bought up by a corporation called F5. So it's now the F5 building, but it was just being completed there, and we all kind of like it. There's a lot of architecture I don't like. I really don't care for the post office at 3rd and Union, but I do like this building. And I'll show you a shot of it looking down we're looking down 4th Avenue. There's the Methodist temple there, Methodist dome. And we're looking down 4th, and I don't mind this little streak. I think of it as a lightning bolt. And only after I shot this did I find out what it was based on.
It was what?
What this building was created for. The Seattle developer, Eric Daniels, commissioned, he thought, I want a beautiful building that is in the spirit of a great actress from the 50s and 60s. And because he's always been a fan. So he took a picture of the actress in one of her most famous movies, and he mounted it in the lobby. So when the workers are building this structure, they would walk past her and genuflect every day. Now look at that, look at the cant of the building and how straight it reflects the building across the way, but it also has a kind of a weird angular tilt. You see sky in places you don't expect. Well, here's who. The grace, the beauty, and the cant of Audrey Hepburn. And you can see, there it is, in her cigarette holder, in her hips. Look at that. So he had her, this enormous photo of Hepburn in the lobby. So the workers would parade past and say, oh, this is dedicated to my favorite actress, and this was taken from Breakfast at Tiffany's. And you all know the song from Breakfast at Tiffany's. Well, let's sing it. Moon River. Okay. Well, this is a story that actually Clay was deeply involved with. In '89, they were going to close the Admiral Theater in West Seattle, which was one of those marvelous structures that's so unique and so strange that to lose it, it would just have a little, plucks your heartstrings to think of losing it. Well, here in this photo we have future Mayor Greg Nichols, Sharon Nichols, his wife, their son, and I think this is
Georgette Valley.
Georgette Valley, yeah.
Representative.
So all these political people, and Clay led the charge to save the Admiral Theater. He still lives 3 blocks away. So here's our modern day Victor Steinbrook saving the Admiral Theater from destruction, and now it's still a theater. It's in permanent state of salvation. And today, let's take another look. Here it is when it opened. This is opening day of the Admiral. Look how gorgeous that building is. Designed like the Kalakala, like a ship.
It's to look like a ship. It's Art Deco, and the opening night in 1942 was Weekend in Havana with Carmen Miranda, Chiquita Banana. Remember?
Now, Clay will point out that this was supposed to be closing night.
It is. Yeah.
Of the theater, and the movie that they're showing, Dirty Rotten Scoundrels. That became a theme. No to the wrecking ball. And here we are. So Clay organized nearly 1,000 school kids to come out and surround this theater a couple years ago. And I got up on another cherry picker and shot down and took a picture of all these kids coming from the elementary schools all around. And there's Clay, and there's Norm Rice and Greg Nichols and a bunch of other politicos, and everyone is delighted at having saved this remarkable landmark. And now it's what, a fourplex?
It's a fourplex, and we called this photo the group hug. Gene made it possible to look like the people were hugging the building.
Well, this photo is interesting because it's for a couple reasons. The first one is it still stands. This is the oldest structure in Seattle to this day. It was Doc Maynard's house. He moved from downtown Seattle. He left all the other pioneers and ended up going to West Seattle and picked up a few hundred acres of land with his wife Catherine. They tried to start a farm. They failed miserably and nearly starved. But when he was there, he built 2 houses. The first one burned, and this was his replacement house, built in probably 1860. So this structure, built by Doc Maynard, still exists. The people, however, in this picture, which is a picture taken in the 90s, so 30 years after Maynard built it, this picture, you all know Maynard. The doc, the physician to Chief Seattle.
Is a Maynard.
You're a Maynard. We have a Maynard with us.
Catherine was my 2 greats aunt.
Really? Well, she was a marvel, and I think she lived till 96 or something.
Yeah,
she was a remarkable woman. But in any case, she and Doc Maynard David Maynard lived in this house until his death in '68. Well, and then it was sold to a very interesting family, the Hansons. There's Mama Hanson and Great Mama Hanson and Little Something Hanson and Grandpa Hanson and Snidely Whiplash. And there's a little boy peeing on the corner of the house. Well, the Hanson family, Mama Hanson gave birth to a fellow you all know as Ivar. So this is Ivar Hagelund's grandparents and mother. She's in the white dress standing on the porch. And today we go back to this location, and it's in West Seattle. It's been moved a block up from the waterfront, and now it sits just on, well, I'm not going to tell you. The address is in the book. But there's no plaque marking this. No one knows that this is the oldest structure in Seattle today. It's made of wood, too. It's not a stone structure. This is it. And if you drive down Alki and you take a left on 64th, go about 100 yards, 150 yards up the block, there it is on the right-hand side.
There is a plaque set in the concrete on Alki Avenue on the sidewalk where it intersects with 64th.
But nowhere in front of the house, and you'd never know that was the house.
Who are the people there?
These are, that's an interesting question. This is, for about 5 years, Clay was director of the Southwest Seattle Historical Association, which is West Seattle's big historical group. And these are, so we about a year and a half ago, we called everybody up and he said, come on down, Gene's taking a picture for the book. So this is a cluster of West Seattle Historical Association members. And this guy was a neighbor who just happened to be clipping his lawn with his son. And he thought, I'll jump in.
That's right. Okay.
Okay, so this is our last subject for the afternoon. Catherine Maynard, your great aunt, gave Kiki Soblu, the daughter of Chief Seattle, her Anglo nickname, which was Princess Angeline. And we didn't know where she lived below the market. We knew that she lived in some swath below the market, that she had a shack below the market. And this is actually very nicely built, it was given to her as a gift. And she's sitting on the porch, and you can't see it, but there's her little dog literally standing up on its hind legs with its paws in the air. It's a wonderful picture. And so here she is standing on her porch with her little dog begging for scraps from the photographer. And we figured out by triangulating a number of aspects in this photograph, including the stump and the eaves of this building up here, none of which exist, but we could take photos and sort of trace the lineage and the triangles in each photo to come up with the current location. And what we discovered, particularly the efforts of Ron Edge, who is our collector and curator of historical photographs. And so Ron is sitting in this next photo right about where Princess Kiki Soblu sat. And we were amazed to find it was in the open air. So Ron is sitting in this tiny little avenue, this alley going up from below him is the waterfront. And this is between the Pike Street hill climb is about a block that way. This is the Pike Street garage, which fills up the entire area all the way up to the end of the market. And this is the beginning of the Fix Medor building, which is one of the series of buildings which fills up all the way down Western, going all the way down to downtown. Well, we found this little slot coming down from Western, below the market, and it's open still. It's filled with bamboo. He's looking now as Princess Angeline would have looked out towards the waterfront. When she was looking, the waterfront had not yet been filled. So the water, which is now all the way across Railroad Avenue, all the way to the docks, which is 100 yards, 200 yards, it would have been maybe 100 feet below him, you'd have the tide lapping. Because we had these steep hills going right down to the tide line before they filled it in with Denny Hill. So Ron's sitting there, and I love the notion that the place where she lived is still in the open air. It can still, I was afraid I'd have to go into the parking garage and shoot a car, but I didn't.
And if you want to see this yourself, you cannot go where this is because Gene's shooting inside of a fence. This is fenced off. However, you can go to Pike Place Market and eat at Lowell's restaurant. Anybody know Lowell's? Go to the second floor, sit next to the window and look outside, and it's directly beneath you.
So the daughter of Chief Seattle, this was where she lived. And up to this point, 100 years of discussion and querying and wondering, no one had figured out until November of 2017 where she lived. So we kind of nailed that one. That was thanks to Ron. Well, this is the last image in the show. Here she is again, Princess Angeline, Kiki Sobla. We've inset her dad in one of the only, there's a couple photos of her father. This is the only portrait of her father. And so here we are looking up towards First Avenue, and that's Pike running behind her. And at this point, Pike ran all the way down the hill. And where she's sitting was divided off into Post Alley. So that's the street that runs alongside Pike and goes down and then takes a sharp left and goes down the hill. Well, she's sitting right there now, and the reason we have both of them there is we had a little kind of a wonderful and surprising to me, delightful serendipity. We managed to gather the great-great-great-great-granddaughter of Kiki Soblu, who is one of our most accomplished and celebrated artisans of basket weaving and cape making out of cedar, and this is Mary Lou Slaughter, and she also is 80 years old.
Oh.
This is Ken Workman, who's the great-great-great-great-grandson of Chief Seattle. So they're distant cousins, but we got them both together to sit in those spots. And while we were there, Ken was, we're there for maybe 10 minutes. And Ken is, a couple times, he's standing there and he turns around. And again, turns around. And here's the shot that Clay took of me taking this picture. At this point, they're wearing hats, and I say, take off the hats because the shadows are I want to see your faces rather than hats. But Ken just kept turning around and sort of looking behind him. And I said later, Ken, what were you looking for? He said, well, first I thought someone was trying to pick my pocket. And then I thought someone was trying to get past, and they couldn't get past me. And I said, well, there's nobody there. And Clay said, no, there was nobody there. And Ken said, well, I said, so what was it? He said, well, while I'm standing there, I felt someone tap me on the elbow. And Ken has his theory that a distant ancestor joined us for this little picture. And I sometimes feel that same nudge of history in retaking these pictures. And it sort of gives me a little sense that the puzzle piece is dropped into place. But that's, I think, one of my favorite stories of the book is Ken having an experience which he couldn't explain, and none of the rest of us could either. But it's a little nudge of history, we think of it. And here is Paul several years ago when his knees worked, standing up on top of gasworks with Seattle behind him. So thank you so much for coming to see the show, and we'll have a handful of books up here. I did stop off on the way here, and when Paul can't make it, I stop off and I have him sign the book under his name. And I'm happy to sign under my name as well. And Clay is actually the editor of the book. So if you want a little signature from Clay, you can have one as well. And if you're interested, the book is, we've shown maybe 25 comparisons. The book has about 110 comparisons in it with some extra added fun stuff. So I'd encourage you to buy a copy. They run $50, and the governor takes 5 more. We take everything from cash to checks to credit cards. We've learned that that's the one thing that we can depend on is we need to have good financial systems to take your bucks. Anyway, if you would like, you're welcome to come and look at the copies, and I'd love to sign one for you. But in any case, thank you so much. You've been a wonderful audience, and I've got to get out of here, and then I'll fix Paul's computer.
Be thinking about how you want Gene to personalize it for you. Some of you may want to give it as a gift. So think about if you want him to sign it to a particular person.
How much was the total?
The total is $55.
Thank you so much.
Even?
Yeah.